The grand hall of Thornhaven smelled of expensive pine, aged wine, and the suffocating scent of betrayal. Seren Crane stood at the edge of the ballroom, her fingers tracing the frayed hem of her charcoal gray dress. In a room full of silk and starlight, she was a smudge of soot. She was the half-breed, the daughter of a Blackwood witch whose blood was considered a curse, and a father who had long since vanished into the shadows of history. Across the room, Aldrich Vaughn, the future Alpha of Thornhaven, stood bathed in golden light. He was handsome, arrogant, and currently holding the hand of a girl whose lineage was as pure as fallen snow. Seren Crane. Aldrich's voice boomed, cutting through the music. The violins died a jagged death. Seren looked up. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. Her eyes, a deep, unsettling violet, met his. "Step forward," he commanded. As she walked through the parting crowd, whispers followed her like stinging insects. The witch girl actually thought she'd be an Alpha's Luna? Look at her. She has no spark, no wolf, nothing but that tainted blood. Seren stopped 5 paces from him. She could smell his scent cedar and rain the scent that was supposed to belong to her mate, but there was no warmth in it, only the biting frost of public humiliation. I, Aldrich Vaughn, heir to the Thornhaven throne, he began, his chest swelling with self-importance, hereby declare our engagement null and void. I reject you as my mate, as my partner, and as a member of this pack's future. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that carried to every ear in the room. A king needs a queen, Seren. Not a servant with embers for blood. You are a mistake I am finally correcting. The crowd gasped, waiting for the collapse. They waited for the sobbing, the begging, the dramatic scene of a woman losing everything. But Seren Crane did something far more terrifying. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but the sharp, thin blade of a woman who had finally found the exit to a burning building. Slowly, she reached for the silver ring on her finger, a cheap heirloom Aldrich had given her in a moment of feigned affection years ago. She pulled it off. The skin underneath was pale, marked by the weight of a bond she no longer wanted. "Aldrich," she said, her voice crystal clear, ringing with a resonance that made the chandeliers vibrate. "I accept your rejection." She stepped forward, placing the ring on a nearby velvet-covered table. "I thank you for your honesty," she continued, her violet eyes flashing with a sudden hidden heat, "because while you were looking for a queen to sit beside you, I was realizing I didn't want to sit in the shadow of a boy playing at being a king. You didn't reject me, Aldrich. You released me." Silence. It was so thick it felt like physical weight. You dare?" Aldrich stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You are nothing. Without this pack, you are a stray." "Then let me be a stray," Seren replied, turning her back on him, an act of ultimate defiance. But as she turned to leave, the heavy oak doors of the grand hall didn't just open. They shattered off their hinges. A wave of absolute, bone-chilling cold swept into the room. The wine in the glasses turned to slush. The fire in the hearth turned black and died. In the doorway stood a silhouette cloaked in fur and shadows. His presence was a physical pressure, a gravitational pull that forced every wolf in the room to drop to their knees. Alpha King Corvain. The King of Valdrus walked into the room, his boots clicking rhythmically on the marble. He didn't look at the cowering Aldrich. He didn't look at the elders. He stopped directly in front of Seren. His eyes were the color of a frozen sea, and his skin radiated a cold so intense it should have killed her. But as he looked down at her, Seren felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Her blood, the dormant, suppressed fire of the Blackwood line began to boil. "The scent of burning ash," Corvain murmured, his voice like grinding glaciers. He reached out a gloved hand, lifting Seren's chin. They threw away a son because they were afraid of getting burned. He turned his gaze to the room, and for the first time, the people of Thornhaven knew true terror. "This woman is no longer a stray," the king declared, his voice echoing like thunder. "She is the guest of the High Throne, and if anyone tries to stop her from leaving, I will turn this valley into a tomb of ice." Seren looked at the king, then back at the pathetic, red-faced Aldrich. "Shall we go?" she asked, her voice steady. Corvain offered his arm. "The North has been waiting for its spark. Seren Crane, let us not keep it waiting any longer." The transition from the suffocating warmth of Thornhaven to the biting air of the North was instantaneous. As the heavy, iron-bound carriage rolled away from the gates, Seren watched her past disappear through the frosted glass. The lights of the pack house, where she had spent years being treated as a ghost, faded into the blizzard. Inside the carriage, the silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the horse's hooves against the permafrost. Alpha King Corvain sat opposite her. He had removed his heavy fur cloak, revealing a suit of dark midnight blue. Even in the dim light of the flickering crystal lamp hanging from the ceiling, he looked less like a man and more like a statue carved from a glacier. "You are surprisingly quiet for someone who just abandoned everything they knew," Corvain said. His voice didn't just carry sound. It carried a chill that made the air mist in front of Seren's lips. Seren didn't pull her shawl tighter. In fact, for the first time in years, she felt a strange, humming warmth beneath her skin. "I didn't abandon everything, Your Majesty. I simply stopped carrying a weight that wasn't mine to bear." Corvain narrowed his eyes the color of deep, treacherous ice. "Aldrich Vaughn is a fool. He traded a supernova for a candle. But tell me, Seren Crane, why does your presence not wither under my frost? My touch has killed men. My aura has frozen the hearts of warriors." Seren looked down at her hands. They were trembling, but not from cold. "Maybe it's because I've been living in a different kind of winter my whole life. The winter of being unwanted." "A poetic answer," Corvain murmured, leaning forward. As he moved closer, the frost on the carriage windows thickened. "But I suspect the truth is more flammable. The Blackwood blood. They say it was extinguished 3 centuries ago by the first king of Valdrus." "Is that why you took me?" Seren asked, meeting his gaze. "To finish what your ancestor started? To extinguish the last spark?" Corvain's expression didn't change, but his hand gripped the armrest of his seat. "Quite the opposite. I am a man cursed with an eternal winter in my soul. My blood is freezing, Seren. Literally. Within a few years, I will turn into a pillar of ice, and Valdrus will fall with me." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "The legends say that only a Blackwood's flame, a fire born from the deepest sacrifice, can melt the curse of a Valdrus king. I didn't save you out of mercy. I saved you because you are the only thing in this world that might be able to keep me alive." Seren felt a jolt of electricity. It wasn't just a political arrangement. It was a battle of elements. "And what if I can't?" she whispered. "What if the fire they tried to beat out of me is truly gone?" Corvain reached out. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He stopped his hand just inches from her cheek. The air between them hissed as the extreme cold of his skin met the rising heat of hers. "It isn't gone," he said softly. "I can smell the smoke on your skin. I can see the embers in your eyes. You aren't just a girl who accepted a rejection, Seren. You are a goddess who has forgotten how to burn. And I am going to help you remember." Suddenly, the carriage jerked to a violent halt. The horses shrieked in terror. "We are here," Corvain said, his voice turning lethal. "But it seems the council's shadows have traveled faster than my horses." Outside, a low, guttural growl echoed through the mountains. Not the growl of a wolf, but something darker, something that sounded like shifting stones and ancient spite. Lord Calder's scouts had arrived. Seren stood up, her violet eyes glowing with a sudden, fierce intensity. "Let them come," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I've spent too long being cold. I think it's time someone else felt the heat." The carriage door was torn from its hinges not by a hand, but by a gust of shadows. Seren stumbled back as the freezing mountain air rushed in, but she wasn't falling. Corvain was there, his hand firm on her waist. His touch was cold, deadly cold, but to Seren, it felt like a grounding wire for the chaotic energy swirling in her chest. "Stay behind me," Corvain commanded. His eyes had shifted from the icy blue of a lake to the terrifying white of a blizzard. Outside, The mountain pass was swarming. These weren't wolves. They were shadow walkers, wraith-like creatures sent by Lord Calder, fueled by the very curse that was slowly killing the king. They looked like silhouettes of men made of smoke and jagged glass. Corvain stepped out into the snow. With a flick of his wrist, the moisture in the air crystallized into a jagged blade of pure ice. He moved with a lethal, predatory grace, each strike shattering a shadow into 1,000 diamonds of dark mist. But for every one he destroyed, 3 more emerged from the darkness. "They aren't here for you, Corvain." A raspy voice echoed through the trees. It was the voice of a shadow mage, one of Calder's henchmen. "They are here for the witch blood. The girl dies, and so does your last hope for a cure." A shadow walker lunged, bypassing Corvain's guard and diving straight for the carriage. Seren saw it coming. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of ancient power. For 20 years, she had been told to hide it. "Suppress it, Seren, or they will kill you like they killed your mother," her father's voice whispered in her memories. But her father was gone. Aldrich was gone. And if she didn't act, she would be gone too. "No," she whispered. The shadow walker reached through the carriage door, its claws made of cold smoke aiming for her throat. I said, "No!" Seren didn't scream. She roared. Inside her, a dam made of years of shame and fear finally burst. It didn't start as a spark. It started as a hum in her marrow, then a searing heat in her palms. Suddenly, a wave of deep purple fire exploded from her body. It wasn't the orange flame of a campfire. It was the ethereal, violent violet of a dying star. The shadow walker didn't just burn. It evaporated. Corvain froze, mid-swing, as the entire mountain pass was illuminated by a haunting purple glow. The snow around the carriage didn't melt. It turned directly into steam, sublimation, creating a thick, mystical fog. Seren stepped out of the carriage. Her hair was whipping around her face, and her eyes were no longer just violet, they were glowing like twin amethysts set on fire. "My turn," she said, her voice carrying an echo of 1,000 Blackwood ancestors. She raised both hands. She didn't need a sword. She threw her arms outward, and tendrils of purple fire lashed out like whips, incinerating the shadows where they stood. The shadow mage in the trees let out a horrified shriek before disappearing into the gloom, realizing the weak girl was a lie. The silence that followed was heavy. Seren gasped, the adrenaline receding, leaving her limbs heavy. She began to collapse, her knees hitting the frozen ground. Before she could touch the snow, Corvain was there. He caught her, pulling her against his chest. For the first time, he didn't care about his own lethal cold, and for the first time, he felt something impossible. His heart, the organ that had been a block of ice for a decade, thudded. Just once. A dull, heavy beat of life. "Seren," he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically rough. She looked up at him, her breath hitching. I burned them." "You did more than that," Corvain said, his gaze fixed on her lips, then her glowing eyes. "You just declared war on the shadows, and you just gave me a reason to fight it." He lifted her into his arms, carrying her back to the carriage. The wood was charred where she had touched it, a permanent mark of her awakening. "Rest now, little spark," he murmured as he sat beside her, letting her head rest on his shoulder. "We reach the capital by dawn. And then, the world will know that the Blackwoods have returned. The capital of Valdrus, Frosthaven, was a city built of obsidian and white marble, perched precariously on the edge of a frozen cliff. As the carriage passed through the iron gates, the citizens stood in silence, their breaths forming white plumes in the air. They didn't cheer. They watched with a mixture of awe and suspicion. When Corvain stepped out, carrying Seren in his arms, a collective gasp rippled through the gathered nobility. "He carries her?" whispered a duchess draped in silver fox fur. "The cursed king touches a commoner without killing her?" Corvain ignored them all. He marched into the great hall, his footsteps echoing like cracks in a glacier. He didn't stop until he reached the base of the high throne, where a man with hair as white as salt stood waiting. Lord Calder. Calder's eyes were narrow, flickering with a hidden malice as they landed on Seren. He was the head of the High Council, the man who had effectively ruled Valdrus from the shadows while Corvain's heart slowly froze. "Your Majesty," Calder said, bowing low, though his eyes remained cold. "You return with a guest, a girl from Thornhaven. Is she the one the prophecies spoke of? Or just another girl destined to die in our winter?" Corvain set Seren on her feet. She was pale, her dress torn and scorched from the battle in the mountains, but she stood tall. She felt the heat of the high hall not from the fireplaces, but from the stares of 100 enemies. "She is not a guest, Calder." Corvain's voice vibrated through the floorboards. "She is the key, and she will stay in the royal wing, under my personal protection." "The royal wing?" Calder's voice sharpened. "That is reserved for the queen consort. To place a girl of questionable blood, there is an insult to our traditions." Seren stepped forward, her violet eyes locking onto Calder. For a split second, she saw a flash of recognition in his face. Not recognition of her, but of the woman she looked like. Her mother. "My blood isn't questionable, Lord Calder," Seren said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It is ancient. And judging by the way you're looking at me, I think you know exactly whose blood it is." The room went deathly silent. Calder's jaw tightened. "You have your mother's tongue, girl. Be careful it doesn't lead you to the same end." "Enough," Corvain snapped. A layer of frost climbed up the pillars behind him, a physical manifestation of his temper. "Seren is tired. She will be escorted to her chambers. Calder, the council will meet at midnight. We have much to discuss regarding the shadow walkers that attacked us on the road." The private quarters. Hours later, Seren stood on the balcony of her room, looking out over the jagged peaks of Valdrus. The room was filled with luxuries she had never dreamed of, but all she felt was the heavy weight of the past. A knock at the door startled her. It was Corvain. He had changed into a simple black tunic, looking less like a king and more like a man exhausted by the weight of his crown. "You shouldn't have provoked Calder," he said, walking to the balcony railing. "He is dangerous. He has spent 3 centuries ensuring the Blackwood line stayed buried. He killed her, didn't he?" Seren asked, her voice trembling. "My mother didn't just die of a broken heart. He hunted her." Corvain looked at the moon. The council feared the union of fire and frost. They believed that if a king of Valdrus ever truly loved a Blackwood witch, the power would be too great to control. They preferred a cursed king they could manipulate over a powerful king they had to fear. He turned to her, and for the first time, Seren saw a crack in his icy mask. He looked lonely. "My heart beat today, Seren," he whispered. "For the first time in 10 years. It hurt. It felt like a needle stabbing through my chest." Seren reached out, her hand hovering near his heart. "Is that a bad thing?" "It means the ice is melting," he replied, taking her hand and pressing it against his chest. "But when ice melts, it becomes a flood. If you do this, if you stay there, is no going back. You won't just be a girl who survived a rejection. You will be the woman who destroyed an empire's curse." Seren felt the thud, low, heavy, and desperate. Her purple fire flickered under her skin, responding to the rhythm of his life. "I'm not going back, Corvain," she said, her eyes burning with a new purpose. "Aldrich took my home. Calder took my mother. I'm not letting them take anything else." The Royal Library of Valdrus was not a place of books, but a cathedral of secrets. Thousands of crystal vials filled with silvery memory mists lined the shelves, alongside ancient scrolls that crackled like dry leaves under Seren's touch. Corvain was at a council meeting, leaving Seren under the watchful eye of a few silent guards. But Seren knew the castle's layout better than they realized. The shadows of the Blackwood line seemed to whisper directions in her ear. She wasn't looking for history. She was looking for her. Deep in the restricted archives, behind a tapestry depicting the Great Freeze, Seren found a stone door marked with a symbol that made her blood hum. A blooming rose entwined with a phoenix wing, the crest of her mother. With a flick of her finger, a small violet flame licked the lock. The stone groaned and slid open. Inside was a small, dusty sanctuary. On the desk lay a single, unfinished letter. "To my daughter, the spark I must hide. If you are reading this, the ice has claimed me, or the wolves have. Know that Corvain's father did not hate us. He loved me, but in Valdrus, love is the most dangerous treason. Seren's breath hitched. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a massive portrait covered by a moth-eaten shroud. She pulled it down. The woman in the painting was her mirror image, but her eyes were filled with a terrifying power. She wasn't just a witch. She was wearing the crown of Valdrus. She was meant to be queen. A cold voice spoke from the doorway. Seren spun around, her hands instinctively igniting. Corvain stood there, his face shadowed. He didn't look angry, he looked haunted. My father didn't just love your mother, Seren, Corvain said, stepping into the light. He tried to change the laws of the North for her. And for that, the council, led by a younger, more ambitious Calder, poisoned him with the very curse I now carry. Seren gasped. The curse. It isn't a natural phenomenon? No. Corvain's voice was a low growl. It is a weapon. It was designed to ensure no king could ever get close to a Blackwood again. If I love you, the ice in my heart is supposed to shatter and kill me. If I touch you, my frost is supposed to snuff out your life. He walked closer, until the heat from Seren's violet flames began to singe the edges of his tunic. Calder didn't just kill your mother to hide the truth, Corvain continued. He killed her because she was close to finding the antidote. And now, he sees her face every time he looks at you. Seren looked at the portrait, then at the man who was supposed to be her mate by a twisted fate. He thinks he can repeat history. He thinks I'll be a victim like she was. Will you? Corvain asked, his icy eyes searching hers. Seren reached out, grabbing his collar and pulling him down. The contact was a violent collision of temperatures. Steam erupted around them, obscuring the library in a thick, white mist. No, Seren whispered against his lips, her violet fire flaring so bright it turned the room into a dreamscape of purple and silver. My mother died protecting the spark. I'm going to use it to burn his world down. The bond between them, the mate bond, finally snapped into place. It wasn't the soft, golden warmth she had felt with Aldrich. It was a roar of thunder. It was the feeling of a mountain meeting a volcano. Outside, the bells of the city began to toll. The council, Corvain muttered, his forehead resting against hers. They've called for a trial of purity. They found out about the purple fire. Let them call it, Seren said, a cold, regal smile touching her lips. I've spent my whole life being judged by people who are beneath me. It's time I returned the favor. The arena of Valdrus was an amphitheater carved directly into the heart of a glacier. The air here was so cold it felt like inhaling needles. Thousands of citizens and nobles sat in the tiered stone seats, their faces obscured by heavy furs and iron masks, a tradition of the North to show impartiality. At the center of the arena stood a path of ancient blue ice. It was said this ice was sentient, harvested from the deepest depths of the world. It reacted to the soul of anyone who stepped on it. If the soul was pure, the ice remained clear. If the soul was tainted with dark magic, as Calder accused Seren of being, the ice would splinter and drag the sinner into the abyss below. Seren, Crane. Lord Calder's voice boomed from the high balcony. He looked down at her like an entomologist looking at a bug he intended to pin. You stand accused of using forbidden Blackwood sorcery to ensnare the mind of our king. To prove your innocence, you must walk the path of the frozen rose. Corvain sat on his throne, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He had been forbidden from interfering. By law, a king could not defend his mate during a trial of purity. If he moved, it would be seen as a confession of his own corruption. Seren stood at the start of the path. She was dressed in a gown of deep crimson, the color of blood and rebellion. Don't do it, Seren, Aldrich Vaughn's voice called out from the guest gallery. He had traveled all this way, hoping to see her crawl back to him. Just admit you're a witch, and maybe they'll only exile you. I can still take you back as a servant. Seren didn't even turn her head. Aldrich was a mosquito. She was a storm. She took her first step. The blue ice groaned. A dark, jagged crack appeared beneath her heel. The crowd hissed. Calder leaned forward, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. But Seren didn't stop. She closed her eyes and reached deep into her core. She didn't try to fight the cold. She invited it in. She remembered the rejection. She remembered the silence of the archives. She remembered the heartbeat of a king who was dying for her. "Burn," she whispered to her blood. "Show them the sun." The next step didn't crack the ice. It melted it. A hiss of steam erupted as her foot touched the frozen surface. With every step she took, the blue ice turned into a shimmering pool of boiling water. The purple glow in her eyes became so intense that the sun above seemed to dim in comparison. By the halfway point, the frozen rose path was no longer a path, it was a river of fire. The ancient ice, which was supposed to judge her, was being subjugated by her. "Impossible!" Calder shouted, standing up. "She is destroying the sacred relic. Guards, seize her." "Sit down, Calder." Corvain's voice crackled like a breaking mountain. He stood up, his own aura of frost clashing with Seren's heat, creating a localized whirlwind of snow and sparks. "She is not destroying it. She is fulfilling the prophecy. The ice isn't judging her, it is bowing to her." Seren reached the end of the path. She turned to face the thousands of spectators. She raised her hand, and a massive phoenix of purple flame erupted behind her, its wings spanning the width of the arena. The heat was so great that the nobles in the front rows had to shield their faces. For the first time in 300 years, the people of Valdrus felt truly warm. "I am Seren Crane," she announced, her voice amplified by the magic in the air. "I am the daughter of the flame and the maid of the frost. I did not come here to be judged by you. I came here to wake you up." She looked directly at Calder. "The trial is over, and your reign of shadows ends with it." The silence that followed was broken by a single sound. A clap, then another. It was the common people, the workers who spent their lives freezing in the mines, standing up and cheering for the woman who brought the fire. Calder turned pale. He realized he hadn't just failed to kill her. He had given her a throne. The aftermath of the trial was a blur of golden light and terrified whispers. But inside the royal chambers, the world was silent, save for the sound of labored breathing. Corvain leaned against the mahogany desk, his skin so pale it was almost translucent. Blue, frost-like veins were spreading from his collarbone up to his jawline. The air in the room was crystallizing. Every breath Seren took felt like swallowing broken glass. "Stay." "Back," Corvain wheezed, his eyes flickering between a dying blue and a hollow white. "The trial. It forced my heart to beat too fast. The curse is fighting back. It's trying to reclaim the territory it lost to your warmth." Seren didn't listen. She never did when she was told to be afraid. She walked toward him, her crimson dress trailing like a streak of blood on the frost-covered floor. "You told me once that the ice in your heart would shatter if you ever loved me," she said, her voice steady. "But you forgot one thing, Corvain." She reached out, her fingers brushing the frozen skin of his cheek. A hiss of steam erupted, but she didn't flinch. "Ice doesn't just shatter. It melts. Seren, if the seal breaks too fast, it will kill us both," he groaned, his hands shaking as he tried to push her away. "I am a monster of winter. You are a creature of the sun. We are a paradox. Then let us be a beautiful disaster," she whispered. She grabbed the lapels of his tunic and pulled him down. When her lips met his, it wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two warring empires. In an instant, Seren felt the sheer, agonizing weight of 300 years of cold. She felt the loneliness of the kings of Valdrus, the silence of the snow, and the numbing despair of a soul that had forgotten how to feel. It tried to extinguish her, to drown her purple fire in an ocean of black frost. But the blackwood flame was not so easily quelled. Deep within her, the phoenix roared. The purple embers in her blood flared, turning white-hot. She didn't just kiss him, she poured her very life force into the cracks of his frozen heart. Thump. The sound was as loud as a cannon blast in the quiet room. Thump, thump. The blue veins on Corvain's neck began to recede. The frost on the windows turned to rain, sliding down the glass like tears. The lethal cold that had protected and imprisoned him for a decade was evaporating. turned into mist by the sheer intensity of Seren's heat. Corvain let out a ragged cry, his arms finally wrapping around her with a desperate, crushing strength. He wasn't holding her like a king holds a subject. He was holding her like a drowning man holds a lifeline. As they broke apart, Corvain gasped, his chest heaving. His eyes were no longer the color of a glacier, they were a vibrant, piercing electric blue, filled with a raw, terrifying hunger. "I can feel it," he whispered, his hand trembling as he touched his own chest. "The pain. It's gone. But the fire. Seren, the fire you left behind is consuming me." "That's not the curse, Corvain," Seren said, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "That's what it feels like to be alive." Their moment of peace was shattered by a distant explosion from the south tower. The sky outside turned a sickly, bruised shade of green, the color of Calder's dark sorcery. "He's done hiding," Corvain said, his voice returning to its former authority, but now infused with a newfound warmth. "Calder has realized the curse no longer controls me. He's going for the source." "The source?" Seren asked. "The heart of the Blackwood seal," Corvain replied, reaching for his sword. "The place where your mother drew her last breath. He's going to destroy the foundation of Valdrus to keep his power." Seren stood beside him, her hands flickering with violet flames. "Then let's go. I have a debt to settle for my mother, and a kingdom to claim for us." The descent into the royal catacombs felt like walking into the throat of an ancient beast. The walls were lined with the sarcophagi of fallen kings, but the air here didn't smell of death, it smelled of ozone and scorched earth. "The seal is just ahead," Corvain whispered, his hand never leaving the hilt of his blade. His presence no longer radiated a killing frost, but a steady, protective chill that balanced Seren's rising heat. As they reached the central chamber, the ground began to vibrate. In the center of the room stood a massive obsidian monolith, carved with the same rose and wing crest Seren had seen in the library. Standing before it was Lord Calder. He looked different. The facade of the elegant statesman had withered away, revealing a man whose skin looked like cracked parchment. In his hand, he held a dagger dripping with a strange, glowing green liquid, the essence of the curse. "You are too late, little flame," Calder hissed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The seal was never just a lock, it was a battery. For 300 years, it has fed on the suppressed magic of your kind to keep this kingdom in a perpetual winter, to keep me immortal. Seren stepped forward, her violet fire illuminating the dark corners of the tomb. "You didn't just kill my mother because of a law. You killed her because she was going to take away your fountain of youth." Calder laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "She was weak. She thought love could replace power. She begged for your life, Seren. Did you know that? She gave me her heart so that I wouldn't hunt you down in Thornhaven." The air in the room suddenly spiked in temperature. The stone beneath Seren's feet began to glow dull red. "She didn't give you her heart," Seren said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, resonant tone. "She planted a seed, and you were too arrogant to realize it was growing right under your nose." Calder lunged, not at Seren, but at the monolith. He plunged the dagger into the center of the crest. "If I cannot have the power, then Valdrus shall have nothing," he screamed. The monolith shattered, but instead of an explosion of darkness, a torrent of silver memories flooded the room. Seren was suddenly pulled into a vision. She saw a younger Calder, hiding in these very shadows. She saw her mother, battered but standing tall, whispering a final incantation into the monolith before Calder's blade found its mark. "The fire will return." Her mother's voice echoed in the vision, clear and defiant. "And when it does, it will not just burn the ice. It will burn the liar." Seren felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Corvain. He was seeing it too. The truth was out. The curse wasn't a punishment from the gods. It was a parasitic spell, maintained by a man who was too afraid to die. "Corvain," Seren whispered, her eyes snapping open, now blazing with a white-hot intensity. "The monolith isn't the source. I am." She realized now that her mother had hidden the final key within Seren's own DNA. Every moment of suffering in Thornhaven, Every tear she didn't shed when Aldrich rejected her had been refining that power, tempering it like steel. "Do it, Seren," Corvain said, his electric blue eyes reflecting her flames. "Break the cycle. I'll hold back the shadows." From the shadows of the tomb, hundreds of shadow walkers began to crawl, summoned by Calder's dying gasp of magic. Corvain stepped between them and Seren, a whirlwind of ice and steel, protecting the woman who was about to rewrite history. Seren raised her hands toward the ceiling. She didn't just release her fire. She invited the entire history of the Blackwood line to flow through her. "For my mother," she screamed, "and for the king who waited for the sun." The purple fire erupted, not as a wave, but as a pillar that tore through the mountain itself, reaching toward the dark sky above Frosthaven. Here is the rewrite of Chapter 9 Inches English, elevating the scale of the battle to an epic finale. Chapter 9. The Final Conflagration. The mountain of Valdrus groaned as the pillar of Seren's violet fire punched through the ceiling of the catacombs, soaring toward the blackened sky. Calder let out a horrific, inhuman shriek as his body began to mutate. The dark magic he had hoarded for 3 centuries, fueled by the stolen lives of the Blackwood lineage, erupted from his pores. He transformed into a monstrous entity of smoke and jagged obsidian, a titan of shadows that stood 10 feet tall, eyes glowing with a toxic green light. "You think a flicker of heat can change destiny?" Calder's voice was a tectonic grind, vibrating in the very marrow of their bones. "I am the eternal winter. I am Valdrus." The battle shifted from the claustrophobic tomb to the windswept summit of the mountain. In the midst of a violent blizzard, 2 cosmic forces collided. On one side stood the suffocating void of Calder. On the other, a union never before seen in the history of the world. An Alpha King and a Blackwood witch. Corvain moved like silver lightning. His blade, now glowing with a fierce electric blue frost, sliced through Calder's shadowy tentacles with lethal precision. But every time the monster was cut, the shadows knitted back together, fueled by the curse's core. "Seren! He cannot be killed by steel alone!" Corvain shouted over the howling gale, his cloak whipping behind him like a war flag. "He is the embodiment of the curse. Only the primordial fire of the Blackwood line can incinerate his anchor." Seren stood at the center of the peak, her hair a chaotic halo of dark silk. She saw it then deep within the swirling mist of Calder's chest, a blackened, pulsing core. It was the vessel for every stolen memory, and every drop of blood he had used to maintain his immortality. Her mother was in there. Her ancestors were in there. "Corvain! Give me an opening!" The king understood instantly. He didn't hesitate, throwing himself into a final suicidal charge. He slammed his fists into the permafrost, channeling every ounce of his alpha power. A massive cage of ancient ice pillars erupted from the ground, lashing around Calder, binding the monster for 1 heartbeat of time. Seren didn't just throw fire, she became the fire. She closed her eyes and called out to her mother, to the women of her bloodline who had been hunted into the dark. The violet flames surrounding her shifted, turning into a searing, blinding white blue, the highest frequency of Blackwood magic. She lunged into the heart of the shadow. Calder roared, trying to choke her with illusions of her past. He showed her Aldrich's mocking face, her father's abandonment, the years of cold loneliness in Thornhaven. "Those things don't burn me anymore," Seren whispered, her voice a calm at the center of the storm. "Because I have found my own son." Boom! Seren pierced through Calder's center like a solar flare. Her fire exploded from within him, a supernova of violet and white. The shadows were torn asunder. Screams of 1,000 liberated souls echoed through the valley as they turned into sparks of light, ascending toward the stars. Calder disintegrated into ash, his physical form scattering into the wind until nothing remained but a rusted iron ring, the symbol of his decayed power. In the distance, standing near the ruins of the gate, Aldrich Vaughn watched the spectacle with hollow eyes. He fell to his knees in the snow, trembling. He realized the girl he had discarded as soot was the star that saved the world. He hadn't just lost a mate. He had lost the only salvation he would ever know. As the smoke cleared, only 2 figures remained on the summit. Seren stood breathless, her skin glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The violet embers still flickered on her fingertips. Corvain moved toward her without a word, pulling her into his arms. The heat of her body and the unyielding strength of his own merged into a perfect balance. For the first time in 3 centuries, the snow stopped falling over Frosthaven. The first rays of a true dawn began to crest the horizon, staining the sky in shades of amethyst and gold. "We did it," Corvain whispered against her temple. "You brought the spring back, Seren." Seren looked down at the kingdom below, where the thick layers of ice were cracking, revealing the vibrant green of a world that had been waiting 300 years to bloom. "No, Corvain," she smiled, her violet eyes bright with victory. "We are just getting started." The ice did not melt all at once. It wept. In the days following the battle on the summit, the great freeze of Valdrus began to retreat. Cascades of water roared down the mountain cliffs like the kingdom's joy, and for the first time in generations, the scent of damp earth and waking pine filled the air. The coronation was not held in the dark, suffocating confines of the high hall. Instead, it was held in the courtyard, under the open sky, beneath a sun that actually felt warm. Seren stood before the mirror in the royal suite. She was no longer dressed in charcoal rags or battle-torn silk. She wore a gown of shimmering white velvet, embroidered with violet phoenixes that seemed to move when she breathed. On her brow sat a circlet of white gold and amethyst, the crown of the High Queen. A knock at the door preceded Corvain. He looked different without the weight of the curse. His skin was flush with life, his eyes no longer frozen, pits of despair but bright, piercing windows to a soul that had finally found peace. "The people are waiting," he said, stepping behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Are you ready, Seren?" Seren looked at her reflection. She saw the girl who had been rejected at Thornhaven, the girl who had been told she was nothing but a stain on a lineage. She smiled at that girl. "I've been ready since the moment I walked away from the ring." The judgment. Before the coronation began, there was one final matter of the old world to attend to. In the center of the courtyard, stripped of his fine furs and golden chains, stood Aldrich Vaughn. He looked pathetic, without the protection of his father's title or the arrogance of his status. He was just a man who had made a catastrophic mistake. Beside him stood the remnants of the High Council who had conspired with Calder. Corvain stood beside Seren on the dais. His voice carried the authority of a king, but it was to Seren that the prisoners looked with terror. "Aldrich Vaughn," Seren said, her voice calm and cold. "You came to my kingdom seeking a witch to testify against me. You sought to use my pain to elevate your own standing." Aldrich fell to his knees, his hands shaking. "Seren, please. I was confused. The bond. I didn't understand it. We can start over. I'll make you my Luna. I'll—" "Silence," Corvain growled, a faint hint of frost crackling at his feet. Seren stepped down from the dais until she was eye level with the man who had once been her world. "You still don't get it, Aldrich. You didn't reject a girl. You rejected a new Thun, goddess, and a goddess does not start over with a coward." She turned to the guards. "Strip him of his rank. Exile him to the southern wastes. Let him live the rest of his life as a nameless stray, in a land where no one knows his name and no one cares for his bloodline. That is his mercy." As Aldrich was dragged away, screaming her name, Seren didn't feel anger. She felt nothing. He was finally a ghost. The crowning. The high priest stepped forward, holding the ancient staff of Valdrus, but he didn't hand it to Corvain. He handed it to Seren. "For 300 years, we lived in the shadow of a lie," Corvain announced to the thousands of citizens gathered. "We were told that fire was our enemy. We were told that to feel was to die. Today, we acknowledge the truth." He turned to Seren and knelt on one knee, the Alpha King bowing to his mate. "Seren Crane, you are the flame that thawed my heart and the light that saved my people. I do not just claim you as my mate, I claim you as my sovereign." The crowd erupted. It wasn't the polite applause of the nobility. It was the roar of a people who were finally warm. Seren raised her hands, and as she did, a gentle wave of violet heat radiated from her, blooming the thousands of frost roses that had been planted around the courtyard. The purple flowers opened all at once, a miracle of magic and nature. The winter is over, the people cried. Long live the Queen of Fire! Long live the King of Frost! Epilogue. The Bloom. Months later, the balcony of the palace was no longer a place of lonely vigils. It was covered in climbing vines and violets. Seren leaned against the railing, watching the sunset. Valdrus was transforming. Trade routes were opening. And for the first time, Blackwood descendants were coming out of hiding, returning to a home that finally welcomed them. Corvain stepped out, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. The southern borders are reporting the first harvest of the season, he murmured. And the council, well, the new council actually agrees on something for once. And what is that? Seren asked, leaning back into his strength. That I am the luckiest man to ever wear a crown, he whispered. Seren turned in his arms, her violet eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. The fire in her blood was no longer a wild, destructive force. It was a hearth, a steady, glowing warmth that promised a future of peace. We have a lot of work to do, Corvain, she said, pulling him into a kiss that tasted of spring and starlight. We have forever, he replied. The girl who accepted a rejection without begging had found something far greater than a pack or a title. She had found herself. And in doing so, she had set the world on fire.